Thank you very much, Julian, for that introduction. Could I also acknowledge Governor Michael, who is here with us today, and Pat, and there's going to be a certain amount of repetition in the early parts of my remarks, as you did a very thorough job on discussing the enormous relevance of CY O'Connor's achievements to this state. Can I acknowledge John Cowdell, who is a former President of the Legislative Council. There are other distinguished guests here, but none more distinguished than CY's family, and it's a great thing to have the family still continuing the traditions that he put down in his time as effectively our chief engineer. And I have to say that the achievements of his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren are actually on a par with the achievements he had. Different spheres, different things that they have done, but it is staggering to me that the family of someone so distinguished could continue a contribution out there through the years. Can I too, as has been done already, acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. We are privileged to co-occupy this land with the oldest civilisation on earth. It's an honour to be invited as a speaker on an event celebrating the life of that great man, even if the day is the most tragic day of his existence. I'm talking in my capacity as a proud West Australian. I spent a near lifetime in politics from here and topped it up with representational duties in the US. And one of the dominant themes of my life's work has been an attempt at a realistic understanding of the national strategic situation and what policies and actions are essential for this nation's long-term survival. The extraordinary thing about the Governor's job is that it has significantly reoriented my perspectives and understandings, both in historical and contemporary terms. I've been briefed into a deeper understanding of how absolutely critical this state and developments in it is to the nation as a whole, and how this state works. And tonight, later on, I want to talk about some of our strengths. This annual lecture provides an opportunity for someone in my position to undertake reflection. There was some similarity between CY's era and this one. CY had to handle the infrastructure challenges of a massive increase in population, 50,000 to 200,000 in the decade that a little bit more than a decade that he effectively served us. That was based on a mining boom. We have been similarly challenged with what has been a further mining-based surge over the last 2 decades. Part of his legacy, though it is distant, has helped us comprehend the challenges in a way that makes the truly extraordinary efforts most recently in the north seem frankly just part of the passing parade. We do these things now with an expertise commonly accepted that is world class. CY was a man ahead of his time. With 25 years of experience in New Zealand behind him, in 1891 he arrived here. He did so at the invitation of the then new Premier, Sir John Forrest. He undertook the role of both acting General Manager of Railways and the Engineer-in-Chief in WA. Over the course of his time in Western Australia until his untimely death in 1902, he undertook major projects which contributed significantly to the development of Western Australia and left an indelible impact on our state. He arrived in WA immediately prior to the discovery of gold in Kalgoorlie. Amid increasing population and consequently increased resource demands, he had a very clear-cut view on what the development issues and concerns in Western Australia were. These views, however, were not without opposition, disagreement and controversy. David Wish-Wilson, in his book Perth, describes Premier Sir John Forrest as a, quote, a great abettor of O'Connor's various projects, protecting him from interference and broadly encouraging the realisation of his ambitions. However, Forrest himself was also reported to have doubts about one or two of the plans. His plans, for example, for the development of Fremantle Harbour did not initially receive his support, and he believed it was too costly and too risky. However, he admitted at the opening of the harbour that he'd been won over, and more importantly, just let him do it. O'Connor's determination, despite the doubt and criticism of many, is inspirational. It is vital for us that we had people like O'Connor who were prepared to live effectively on a political straight razor. During a significant period in the state's development, he was always at risk of mockery and discarding. It was in some ways to his misfortune that CY found himself situated in a period where we effectively came into responsible government. The departure of Forrest for the National Legislature, which resulted in 4 changes of state government within a single year, created the conditions that left O'Connor exposed to the criticism of parliamentarians and the ridicule of sections of the press. As an engineer, he was no naif, and he knew where he stood in the altered political climate. In the end, the concerns and worries that entailed, in all probability, induced his decision to take his own life. We should pause on this and think a little further. Back in those days, O'Connor operated in a milieu in this state of deep political immaturity. Colonial politics, up until responsible government, was marked by a relatively authoritarian governor, surrounded by a limited dancing social set, and opposed by an often frustrated class of journalists and would-be, could-be community leaders prepared to see and find endless error and assume nothing could be achieved unless they were achieving it. Scepticism abounded, judgment did not. He was vulnerable in an atmosphere without balance, particularly when his protector was removed. He was undertaking big projects which to him seemed the normal way an engineer solved problems. He didn't himself see himself as particularly groundbreaking, he just saw himself as what an engineer would see himself as, presented a problem and resolving it. Nothing that he was doing for him seemed to be a terribly big deal, even though it attracted the hostile attitudes and actions, most of them meretricious, by the political class that surrounded him. That normalcy was beyond the scope of the imagination of many invested in an essentially immature, broader political process and a similarly challenged hovering media. In the book The Chief, C.Y. O'Connor, the late Dr. Marab Talman describes O'Connor's impact on Western Australia as standing in comparison with that of Isambard Kingdom Brunel in the United Kingdom. He was a man championing innovative ideas and projects such as the creation of the port, the Goldfields pipeline and significant railways. These significant undertakings are key pieces of infrastructure which underpin many of our strengths and character today, but all of them were controversial. His plan for the development of the port was much criticised on cost. The development of the port also required the removal of a rock bar to open the Swan River to the Indian Ocean. This upset the Wadjuks, and their upset was essentially ignored. However, the opening of the Swan River to the Indian Ocean, and therefore the city of Perth to the wider world, was seen as essential to the city's centrality in WA's development. The Fremantle port, of course, now facilitates trade that is vital to our state's economy and remains WA's largest and busiest general cargo port, operating through 2 harbours. The inner harbour at Fremantle handles almost all of the container trade for WA. The outer harbour is one of Australia's bulk cargo ports, handling grain, petroleum, liquid petroleum gas, alumina, mineral sands, fertiliser, coal, sulphur, iron ore and other bulk commodities. Reportedly, 3.75 million worth of trade are handled at Fremantle Port every hour. Following C.Y. O'Connor's move to WA, the discovery of gold prompted a mass migration to the state, as I've mentioned, that saw its population rise. The fields demanded resources. The poor water supply in the goldfields at the time created harsh and unsanitary conditions, with many people dying, particularly due to the prevalence of typhoid. The method of extraction used in the mining process also required large quantities of water that further exacerbated the problem. At the request of government, O'Connor designed the Goldfields Water Supply Scheme, which saw water transported from Mundaring Weir in the west to a reservoir at Kalgoorlie. The pipeline was to serve as a reliable source of water for both the mine and the goldfields. At the time of the opening of the scheme, it was recognised as the largest engineering undertaking of its time, recognised globally. When it opened in 1903, it was the longest pipeline in the world and the first major pipeline in the world constructed of steel. O'Connor and his hydraulic engineer, Thomas Hodgson, adopted the use of new material and new technology when designing the pipeline. Through the Goldfields Water Supply Scheme, O'Connor succeeded in pushing the limits of the technology of his day. In many ways, our northern offshore and onshore extraction industries, now with their biggest ofs and best ofs, most capable robotics, draw a line straight back to CY's engineering genius. The scheme supported the emergence of WA as a minerals province. The pipeline would also become significantly important in the development and sustainment of much of WA's agricultural industry. Another, at least partial legacy, is the wheat fields remain among the most productive wheat fields in Australia, accounting for 42% of the nation's wheat crop and sustaining 6 million sheep. The pipeline, now known as the Golden Pipeline, still remains Kalgoorlie's primary source of potable water and continues to service the domestic agricultural and mining needs of surrounding communities. Pipelines now remain central to the transportation of critical resources such as water, gas, oil and other liquids across the state of Western Australia and across Australia more broadly. His success in the role of acting General Manager of Railways can also be summarised in noting that by the time Forrest resigned as Premier, every major goldfield was connected by telegraph or railway to Perth, and the big towns had been provided with essential services. So too had the southwestern farming districts and their local centres. Railways continue to play a vital role both in connecting communities across the expanse of WA, as well as the use of railways in our burgeoning resource industry. A man I thought the world of, and one of my teachers at UWA, the late Professor Geoffrey Bolton, wrote a good history of WA, Land of Vision and Mirage. In a collection on Geoff's work, Prof Stuart McIntyre identified one of Geoff's themes, and that was, quote, that this isolated society was given to big projects hastily planned and executed that never fulfilled their promoters' grand visions but usually left a residue of modest growth. At least that conforms to a do no harm requirement, but I don't think that would be a fair assessment of CY. His were deliberately planned and effectively executed. The only one I would query was the blowing of the mouth of the Swan, which salinised the reaches of the river. But in terms of the simple objective of effective riverine traffic, important in the day, so it's easy to see why it was done. It totally altered the ecology of the Swan. It made it a salt river rather than a freshwater river, at least as far as Guildford, effectively. Contemporary WA does think and collectively act in a framework of broad thinking, unconsciously, within the CY tradition. As Governor, I am briefed in a myriad ways on projects critical to the country's future. It is a constant verity in our public debates that we need to think beyond our mining energy sector. With suggestions, we risk being a one-trick pony. Frankly, I think that misses the point. We are such a powerful extractive state that industry produces a multitude of spin-off industries and services. I've enjoyed pointing out, for example, in this discussion over where full-cycle docking should be done for Australia's submarines, that WA has 50% more blue-collar skilled and semi-skilled workers than South Australia. I am tired of us being insulted. In that regard, we have vastly greater number of skilled workers capable of doing that sort of work than the place where it is currently being done. When I was ambassador to the United States, I used to point out that 60% of the world's mining industry software is written in an area 20 kilometres around this building. Its supporting industries and services drive a multitude of seemingly unrelated products. It is a major factor in Australia's diplomatic posture. The industry is a ticket to the global top table. We are a mining and energy superpower. I just note one element of that, that the major African mining conference takes place in Perth every year with 15 African mining ministers attending. Doesn't take place in Johannesburg or any of the other African cities. It takes place here because they accept that this is where mining genius circulates. WA has a better global outlook than just about any other part of Australia. Our dynamic industry has seen merchandise exports to Asia rising from 24 billion to 129 billion between 2004 and 2018. And our state exporting more to Asia than any Australian state or territory. WA and our people are of exceptional importance to the nation, and increasingly so in these times of global uncertainty. We are the world's greatest mineral province, with some 21,030 mining tenements in force and about 1,000 mines either operating or under development, and 47 offshore facilities. I think in the rest of Australia there's some sort of image, oh yes, they've got a few iron ore mines in the north, they've got a bit of gold at Kalgoorlie and a bit of this and that everywhere else. The rest of Australia has absolutely no understanding of the monstrous scale of what is effectively being done in this state. These sites include resources and expertise underpinning the green technologies the world urgently seeks now and will need into the future. We work to not only improve our own society but to advance others too, via world-leading work in fields as diverse as health research to space and automation. I would like to reiterate the astounding fortune we offer the globe in providing open and fair access to critical minerals which underpin the world economy. The fact that half the world's lithium supply comes from WA, including the world's largest lithium mine, and only 2.5 hours from here, is a testament to this. In fact, someone quipped to me that the Greenbushes mine probably had both the world's highest grade and second highest grade of lithium, the second being Greenbushes tailings dam. We now seem to have other equally, some speculate even more promising, lithium reserves in our north. Mineral production and leadership in Western Australia is critical to national prosperity, critical for our survival, critical for ourselves, critical for our friends, critical for our trading partners. We have all the minerals vital for battery production, all now being mined. We have all the rare earths, heavy and light, critical for industrial magnet production, and all the other components for the fourth industrial revolution production, present here in WA, some in production. Other countries have what we have. What they don't have is our highly developed productive genius. Beyond high-grade resources, including all forms of critical minerals available right here in WA, our mining industry is the world gold standard in offering no sovereign risk, secure and voluminous supply, fair and safer work, innovative mining, and environmentally and ethically responsible supply. Nobody else does that, not all of them. We do that here. When you get something from Australia or from Western Australia, you're not getting blood diamonds. You're not getting piratical production of rare earths. You are getting an environmentally safe, high standard product produced on the basis of a fairly paid and protected labour force. That is really something to conjure with. We are actively exploring opportunities for the state in areas of lithium and hydrogen production and energy, as well as exploring our mineral processing capabilities. And I'll just take hydrogen as one of them. You can do hydrogen just about anywhere if you actually want to do it. But you want to do it, I would suggest to those who are thinking of investing in that area, where you know you're producing with people who know what to do and who are safe. So I would suggest to them that it would be a very sensible thing for them to focus on us if you don't want to get into trouble down the track on environmental or human rights charges. As with C.Y. O'Connor, WA continues to be at the forefront of many technological innovations, both in and beyond the resources sector. Technological advances present new ways to combat emerging challenges. A number of cooperative research centres are currently in development and operating across WA. These centres are pioneering research into future battery industries, cyber security, various areas of health science, mineral exploration and more. A fusion of emerging technologies with our inherent strengths in the mineral and resources sector has contributed to WA being a global leader in automation. Advanced technology in the fields of autonomous transport and advanced robotics is becoming a regular feature in mines across WA. Rio Tinto, as an example, currently operates the world's first fully autonomous heavy long-distance railway system, AutoHaul, which has so far travelled more than 7 million kilometres. The use of drones and remotely operated vehicles to conduct risky jobs and inspections is ensuring the safety of employees. These skills are transferable into other areas and sectors, such as the space industry, in which WA is playing a prominent role. Woodside and NASA are currently working in collaboration to explore how robotic technology can be used to improve safety, reliability and efficiency in the high-risk and remote environments where Woodside operates. Through this collaboration, Woodside contribute their advanced cognitive science technology developed in their state operations, while NASA shares their expertise in robonauts used for tasks in places such as the International Space Station. WA's strengths in this area will be further utilised in our contributions in the Australia-NASA Moon to Mars partnership. Perth has secured the headquarters for the national entity AROSE, Australian Remote Operations for Space and Earth, which is being led by founding partners Woodside, Fugro, Nova Systems, Curtin University and the University of WA. This partnership will enable WA to play a key role in the development of technologies and services for space that will benefit future exploration. I was a bit fascinated by all of this because NASA was a big deal and we had a lot of engagement with it when I was ambassador in the United States. And I was told by a former NASA employee, actually 27 years with them, the reason why NASA wanted to get into partnership with us is they considered our robotics in the north 10 years in advance of them. 10 years in advance of what they want to use if they're going to be able to effectively operate on Mars. WA is also playing a vital role in co-hosting the Square Kilometre Array, a global big science project to build the world's largest and most capable radio telegraph, done in collaboration with South Africa. And the state's involvement in this project should present opportunities across a variety of industries and sectors. WA remains uniquely placed to contribute to ensuring Australia's national security. WA serves as the gateway to the Indian Ocean and emerging international defence markets. As the location of HMAS Stirling, RAF Base Pearce and the Campbell Barracks, there is a critical defence presence here. As the regional strategic environment continues to change and increase in its complexity, WA's defence capacity and capabilities remain central to the assurance and consideration of our national security, not to mention the free flow of trade and security of our neighbours. But herein lies the challenge. I've talked here in truisms and factoids, actually without context. We need to harden up. We should struggle for the principles of the liberal international order so vital to us economically. However, frankly, increasingly force majeure rules. When I was Defence Minister, I used to think in terms of deterring and repelling raids. Those were low-level threats that you could identify within capabilities that existed within the area, and we needed to make absolutely certain that we had a force in being capable of dealing with them. As the climate crisis and the critical character of fourth industrial revolution minerals evolves, increasingly we need to think not so much of raids, but of seizure. Success for an enemy would create almost as much of a logistical problem for us taking the north back, for example, than for them holding it. Others may come to regard our proud boast of a continent for a nation as no God-given right. I think of this particularly in terms of what we see offshore up in the north, and also the fact that there at least is in potential in one of the areas north of a mine for heavy rare earths at Browns Range that could well have the biggest and most qualitative supply of minerals like dysprosium, which are absolutely critical to the capacities of the fourth industrial revolution, not to mention the fact that that is essential in 3,400 American weapon systems, and now is produced exclusively in China, but maybe up at Browns Range, and this is not proved up, about 300 years worth of supply. Now, this is not to throw out panic lines, but there is something else happening, and that is in relation to climate change. We do have a clear fix on what climate change means for the southeast and southwest of Australia. It means something like Saudi Arabia, which is over the course of the next 50 years, and we've got a pretty fair understanding of that. We don't yet have a complete set of modelling for the north of Western Australia, but from preliminary observations, and can be seen in the fact that why we see a dry southwest, the actual total amount of rainfall in Australia is not going down, the north. And what is perceived to likely to happen in the north is that the level of water supply as climate change grips is likely to be able to support agriculture and even more intensive food growing processes. Climate change, I am a total climate change believer, and the human causes related to climate change, a total believer. I am not confident that we're going to deal with it. And that being the case, we need to look around the globe and see what will happen. Everybody who lives on the coast will be disbenefited, no matter what country you are in. But not everybody overall is going to be equally disbenefited. There are going to be marvellous opportunities in Russia, marvellous opportunities in Canada, marvellous opportunities in Alaska, with the coming exposure of enormous amounts of potentially arable land and easier access to resources. The pressure on China will be massive. There'll be no country worse affected. And there are resolutions. One is the diversion of the Mekong, and the heads of virtually all the rivers rise in Tibet. And if you divert the Mekong to go into the Chinese river systems, what do you reckon is going to happen in Southeast Asia? And I'm talking now not in my lifetime, but I certainly am talking in the lifetime of my children. And as the Chinese look around, what do you think they're going to see in the old areas of Siberia and elsewhere that were once part of China until seized by Russia? I think of Deng Xiaoping's comments as they restructured relations with Russia in the early 1990s. They signed a series of the most complex arms delimitation agreements that anyone has ever signed, and they signed Chinese recognition of the border. But Deng Xiaoping said to them, "This holds for us. Don't think it holds for a Chinese government 100 years from now." This is a world that we are now entering, particularly as a result of these, in part, human-induced crises, where force majeure is going to be a major element of the state of play. And there's no area that we need to be more effectively capable of deterring activity in than in our northwest. We are the big deal for the future defence of this country. We are the most important target. I don't mean us down here. I mean to our north. The significance of West Australia to our nation's security and prosperity is only going to grow. Consequently, as I said, we're going to become a bit of a target. And we're likely to experience, as I said, diverse effects of climate change. In the south, and indeed across the continent, there's substantial drying, but our north faces a different variety of weather events. We now, of course, have most on our minds, at least balancing that related to climate change, the impact of the coronavirus, COVID-19. That is going to have a short-term impact of a considerable amount, including short-term demand of battery-related materials by impacting the demand for electric vehicles and disrupting supply chains. However, the continuing impacts of climate change, I suggest, are more important for the medium to long-term outlook. With any sort of luck, we'll have this out of the way by next year. I want to close finally with some discussion of Indigenous Australians. It is important that we consider the value of consulting with our First Nations peoples when considering how to tackle emerging challenges. Our First Australians are testament to the possibility of resilience on this continent as one of the oldest continuous cultures, surviving and even thriving through dramatic climate events. The circumstances surrounding a story about cultural burning, miraculously saving a man's house in an utterly fire-ravaged area during the recent bushfire crisis in the east are worth a closer look. It is important that we demonstrate sufficient humility and discuss with the Aboriginal Australians how they manage and have for thousands of years. We are historically challenged here. There are many features in our past of desperate cruelty to our Aboriginal cohabitants. As a governor, I have to be cognisant of that legacy. In Seawise time, the prevailing injustice was a continuing and ultimately successful effort to remove from our constitution a British-imposed obligation to maintain 1% of our gross revenue, or £5,000, whichever was the greater, to be set aside and provided to the Aborigines Protection Board for expenditure upon the welfare of Aboriginal people. Well, that didn't last very long. There is a sort of myth that we live with, that everything that went wrong in relations with the Indigenous community was the fault of the British Colonial Office. No, it wasn't. The British Colonial Office had in mind decency. They had in mind decency for a number of reasons, one of which was practical, which was the most difficult part of the empire they had to control was not us but India. And they didn't actually want racial crises elsewhere in the British Empire, making it difficult to explain their rule in that most important part, that jewel in their crown. We were not the jewel in the British crown. India was the jewel in the British crown. And they wanted behaviour from us, hence things like that clause in the West Australian Constitution. They also, when they came here, the leadership, the new governors, were enjoined by the Colonial Office strictly to keep separated from the Indigenous community those like escaping convicts or convicts who might cause them trouble. They were deeply concerned at the capacity of us to ignore the needs, the plights, the rights of those with whom we found ourselves engaged. So cross were the British about not this particular thing, but the blackbirding that was going on in Queensland, that in 1896 they sent the cruiser Ramillies up the Brisbane River firing its guns at the city. They were, of course, loaded with blank, but they indicated to the good colonists of Queensland, next time they will be loaded. And there was a constant effort. The problem for Indigenous communities arose in large measure when the British regiments were withdrawn from Australia to fight the Maori Wars in the 1860s, and they were replaced with with local, territorial, armed individuals, and developed horrendous outfits like the Black Police in Queensland. So we've got a bit to think about. But how different it is now, and how different it is here now. We are the native title state. When all the claims conclude that are a product of the High Court decisions in the 90s, about 90% by area of native title successfully settled will be here in Western Australia, 10% in the rest of the country. We now have one agreement, which is effectively a treaty with the Noongar Nation, and another will shortly be with us. I was sitting at dinner with one of the Noongar negotiators, with Colin Barnett, and he said to, and understand, this treaty was negotiated by a Liberal government. Colin Barnett was sitting over the table from him, and he said to Barnett, "We consider ourselves negotiating nation to nation." And Barnett's reply was, "So do we." Now you cannot even begin to think of the importance of that exchange. You cannot even begin to think of the importance of it. And that is something that we need to contemplate. It's an agreement. It's called an agreement. What is an agreement between two nations? A treaty. There is, and there'll be another one of those negotiated shortly, or completed shortly, being negotiated at the moment. To be frank, it's not been a product of our initiative. It has been imposed by the High Court, but it is ours to implement. We have a new chance. I also say about the two treaties that are being negotiated, or the two agreements that are being negotiated. These are being negotiated in the area where native title has no chance, because other forms of title, in the light of the decisions taken by the High Court of Australia, have suppressed native title. So what we're actually doing with those agreements is going beyond the area of title suppression, which is manifest right down the east coast and in South Australia, which means only 10%. And we have said in what is like areas to all the areas down the East Coast, we're going to have a treaty with you that effectively gives you a form of native title. We don't talk about any of this. We don't even seem to think about it. These are things which stand very much to our honour. I was intrigued earlier this weekend to go to the opening of the Royal Wankini at the Perth Observatory. There, some notable Noongar artists have portrayed stories that interlink earthly beings to star formation. I said to a guide and some of the organisers that I thought they stopped short of where they might go in what they taught spoke to our kids and adults who go up there to have a look at it. Their stories were beautiful, but their science was formidable and they did not talk about it. Aboriginal astronomy was deeply sophisticated. Movements through the year in star formations determined the Noongar 6 seasons. It was determined by observations, celestial observations. They determined the correct moment for harvesting particular foods at different parts of country. They determined the start of particular hunting seasons, and even a pattern on moves, and these are critical to Aboriginals to secure bloodlines. This was not theology, this was not creation storytelling, this was hard science for hard survival. And we need to understand why they are the oldest civilisations on earth. They're not necessarily the oldest civilisations because of their dreaming. They are the oldest civilisation because of their science. Well, in the story of CY, we have a tale for this state, both of inspiration and caution. We need genius, we need viability in proposals, but we cannot afford easy cynicism and cruel mockery. To quote from A.G. Evans' biography on CY, many decisions of a political or social nature in history that proved to have been overwhelmingly the right ones in retrospect and have since brought benefits to succeeding generations were often decided upon at the time after closely fought debate when a less satisfactory, much favoured alternative might just as easily have won the day. And in such cases, it has been generally the genius or determination of one person that has ultimately swayed opinion. Australians on the whole have a superb egalitarian can-do nature, but we do take scepticism often to excess, and that can destroy the best of us. Just as shifting political environment and trends presented a number of challenges for CY, contemporary global politics and trends challenge us now. How we meet these challenges will ultimately determine our prosperity and probably also our survival. Continuing to champion our innovators during a time of increasing uncertainty is of the utmost importance. CY is an example for us to conjure with. Thank you very much.